If the world is good at doing anything, it's to collectively lose its mind every now and then. And now it's that time. Everybody that feels the need to do something without understanding what to do will most likely end up doing the dumbest thing imaginable. Like a restaurant changing the name of a dish called Putin because it's too resembling of the Russian president. Because if nothing else worked, gravy cheese fries will definitely do it. The shock doctrine of the Ukraine invasion made the world rally round the flag without question, and now some of the most regressive actions in modern history are celebrated without skepticism. The sanctions on Russia imposed by the Western alliance is far beyond anything that could be considered reasonable. The sanctions didn't stay confined to just the targets closest to Putin and the individuals with actual power in the Russian government. They are hurting innocent Russian civilians who have no connection to Kremlin and no say in the matter of Putin's foreign policy. Some of the actions taken are not necessarily economic sanctions, but they are so stupid and vile they still deserve to be called out. Like, for example, the banning of the Russian gymnastics and curling teams from participating in international competition indefinitely. Imagine being a 17-year-old athlete, dedicating your whole life to working on your dreams, only for them to be crushed by some dumb fucks with sweaty ball sacks in $5,000 suits. I mean, look at those gymnastics violating the Ukrainian airspace. This shit fuckery goes even much further than this. The International Paralympic Committee banned Russian and Belarusian athletes from Winter Paralympics in Beijing. Look at those handicapped war criminals violating international law. How could you not ban them? The ban on Russian ice hockey players came next, and now calls for banning Russian gamers are in the ether. The biggest threat to international security is yet to be addressed though: Russian university students. That's right, Putin's campaign wouldn't have advanced as far as it did if it weren't for those Russian students in US schools securing major strategic victories. Zelensky also has his own share of stupidity, calling for a no-fly zone over Ukraine to prevent Russian jets from bombing their targets. What a vaginal fart. If you pause for about 2 seconds to realize what a no-fly zone is, you have all the time you need to know this is the most brain-dead proposal on the planet. Just think about how you'd want to enforce this no-fly zone. The only way to do it would be with NATO fighter jets shooting down Russian planes when they enter Ukrainian airspace. So now instead of a war in Ukraine, you'd have an international conflict. Beautiful. While these actions are really dumb, people seem to forget how damaging sanctions can actually be. And not in a good way. Sanctions are often preferred to military action as a peaceful and harmless way of enforcing will of states on the international scene. But the historical record of sanctions shows they are neither effective nor peaceful. There are many studies on this subject, but one of the best recent examples is the First Gulf War. In 1990, back then well and alive Iraqi President Saddam Hussein invaded neighboring Kuwait to acquire their oil fields. The UN Security Council immediately passed a resolution to impose economic sanctions on Iraq to force them out. The broad international coalition condemning Iraq's invasion included Western powers, the 21 Arab League countries, and even the Soviet Union, which still existed at the time. When the sanctions did nothing to change Hussein's mind, Allied counteroffensive eventually pushed Hussein out of Kuwait all the way back to Baghdad. The war was over in 6 months, but the sanctions were not lifted for a decade to come. The economic bans were so severe, the result on the Iraqi economy was a catastrophic loss of human life. While the military action claimed up to 50,000 lives, the sanctions claimed over 1 million casualties. Multiple reports showed excess child mortality of more than 500,000 children under the age of 5. Some reports disputed these claims, but the facts of the impact support this number. Iraq's annual rate of inflation hit more than 8,000% a year. All goods and services immediately became unavailable to even the highest paid professions in Iraq. Millions fled the country, causing a massive brain drain and fallout in output. The humanitarian crisis that unfolded was so severe the UN had to introduce a food program to deliver necessary food and medical supplies to ordinary Iraqis. All of these sanctions were originally imposed to kick Hussein out of Kuwait, but eventually remained to topple Hussein out of Iraq. That didn't work either because Hussein was toppled by a military force when the US-UK troops invaded Iraq again in 2003. How is this relevant to Russia? Because the same scenario is playing out again. Sanctions are being imposed in a country whose economy is dependent on oil, gas, and military exports. The sanctions are broad, indiscriminate, and supported by a vast yet incomplete international coalition. The country under the sanctions is ruled by an autocrat who controls the flow of information in the country and disseminates propaganda to always blame foreign forces for the misfortune within the country. Scholars argue about what factors need to be in place in order for sanctions to work. A study of 104 sanction episodes from the First World War until 1989 proposed several criteria, many of which are absent in Russia. According to this framework, for sanctions to work, there needs to be significant international cooperation. The target country must be small, economically dependent, and politically unstable. The target country has to be economically tied with the sender countries. The sanctions must be imposed quickly and decisively, and the cost of those sanctions to the senders needs to be low. With this framework in mind, let's have a look at some sanctions imposed on Russia. The United States announced a range of comprehensive sanctions that broadly target every major sector of the Russian economy, including mining, telecommunications, banking, and transport. EU, UK, Canada, and Australia joined the US in expanding the sanctions into their territories. Russian companies on the list will be barred from raising capital in Western markets, and Russian economy will be removed from trading goods essential to its economy, such as semiconductors, computers, and avionics. Altogether, these sanctions are targeting hundreds of individuals in the Russian ruling elite and dozens of Russian top companies. These sanctions are definitely broad and decisive. They will impact Russian economy in a negative way, as it will most definitely inflate local prices and availability of goods and services. Departing from economic neutrality, US and EU authorities decided to ban Russia out of the SWIFT banking system. The Belgium-based interbank payment system was meant to be neutral. In 2012, when SWIFT was first used to sanction Iran, it was met with resistance for using it for geopolitical means. SWIFT is a massive payment system, handling trillions of transactions a day. Russia, like all of the West, is dependent on it. However, it's not like there aren't alternatives to it, and this ban could significantly backfire on the US and EU. The sanctions, as well as the SWIFT ban, will work to hurt the Russian economy and ordinary people, but they will not work to change Putin's mind. The sanctions will not completely cut off Russia from global trade. Most of them are only enforced by Western allies, US, EU, UK, Canada, and a few others. And while they are significant economic partners of Russia, China has already offered a helping hand. Russian banks removed from SWIFT will be able to transition to other messaging protocols or use China's SWIFT rival, the KIPS system.
I mean, before 1971, people using telephone to confirm their trades. So you can still use email system, phone calls, maybe Telegram, to confirm your trades. So it's much slower, it's less efficient, and it's less reliable, but it's doable. And also, there's a CIPS system that is developed by the Chinese Central that has been running for 4 years.
KIPS is the same as SWIFT, but instead of the US dollar being the dominant currency, is the Chinese yuan. KIPS is infinitely smaller compared to its mainstream counterpart. While more than 11,000 institutions participate in SWIFT, only less than 100 are in KIPS. Since much of Europe is dependent on oil and much of trade used to be done via SWIFT, the spike in oil and gas prices will likely continue. Paradoxically, this will increase Russian oil and gas profits even though it might decrease their revenue. In other words, ordinary people will end up paying more money for less gas, while oil and gas oligarchs will see record profits. As Russia moves to KIPS, the standing of the US dollar could weaken against Chinese yuan. Since China has refused to participate in the sanctions, Russian oligarchs have a way out of the most disastrous impacts the sanctions would otherwise cause. Sanctions work well when they are imposed on a small economy. Russian economy isn't small by any measure. Russian people are poor, but the country is the 6th largest economy by real GDP. Russia is one of the largest exporters of petrol, gas, and military exports. Russia is rich in natural resources, including strategic minerals and rare earth elements. Russia is far from politically unstable. Putin holds a tight grip on the regions and peripheries of the state. Russian parliament, military, and police are loyal to Kremlin, and all opposition is dealt with swiftly. The idea for economic sanction is for them to translate to internal pressure on the government to back down. However, since Putin controls information dissemination on Russian TV and the internet, this isn't likely to happen. He just signed into law an act that criminalizes misinformation about Russian armed forces with up to 15 years of prison time. This forced all foreign media outlets, including BBC, CNN, Bloomberg, and others, to suspend the reporting and broadcast in Russia. Putin also blocked Twitter and Facebook for removing Russian state media from their platforms. Google was forced to cooperate with Kremlin's censorship requirements on its mobile and online platforms under threat of imprisoning their local staff. Apple willingly offered cooperation and disabled its private relay feature in Russia to stop obfuscating users' browsing traffic. Such a level of information control gives Putin all the tools he needs to twist any and all sanctions against his invasion as a foreign threat against Russia and blame it all on Western imperialism. His approval ratings since the invasion went up, not down, as many would hope. There's definitely dissent in Russia, but much of it is either imprisoned, poisoned, or dead. The most meaningful sanctions are seizures of billionaire assets offshore. Confiscating yachts, mansions, or property owned by known Russian oligarchs is a lot more difficult than it sounds. Switzerland and other financial privacy havens are protecting a lot of assets of known international criminals, torturers, human traffickers, dictators, and terrorists. Switzerland symbolically expressed support for some of these sanctions, but unless they open up files on the Russian oligarchs, many of them will keep their assets hidden from Western authorities. Punishing an entire nation for the crimes of a single person who rules them is ruthless and cruel. Punish Putin and everyone close to Putin. Take everything away from them. Offer protection to critics and activists in Russia. Offer significant rewards for soldiers deflecting Russian army. And not just them, but their entire families also. The best way to beat an autocrat is to offer a better alternative. It shouldn't be too difficult for democracies of the world. If you're a Russian watching this video, use Tor to anonymize your traffic, Signal to protect your communication, and Briar to organize unstoppable protests. I will follow this up with a tutorial dedicated to anyone dissenting against an authoritarian government in Russia. In the meantime, watch my anonymity and privacy tutorials to protect yourself from unjust Russian crackdown on your internet freedoms. Stay strong, stay free.